We talking about practice. Not a game. We talking about practice.
Now, back to the After Practice Podcast with Lake Lewis.
Welcome back to the After Practice Podcast. Appreciate you joining me as always. And you can subscribe to this podcast via Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, you name it. If you are into the audio version, you can subscribe anywhere. And then, of course, you can watch this on YouTube and on sportsjourney.com. Today, I have two really distinguished guests coming on. One is a long time friend of mine, kind of like my brother from another mother. That's at least what he says all the time. Rich Quinones, one of the best in the business, and we'll talk about what he's doing shortly. And then, of course, I have Mr. James Hasty. If you are a guy like me that remembers the good old days of the NFL, you remember this guy being a Pro Bowl corner for the New York Jets as well. Had to stay in Kansas City, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, James, you had a short stay with the Raiders too. So
that's correct.
Absolutely. Correct. So appreciate you gentlemen coming on. You know, I cover the Washington Commanders, as you know, and there's some stuff going on right now with this football team that, you know, I think Ron Rivera's done a wonderful job. I think he's brought some professionalism and some class to the organization. But I've been saying this, I think everyone knows that the writing is probably on the wall for Ron at the end of this year. And I think you have an offensive coordinator right now in Eric Bieniemy, who's doing some wonderful things with Sam Howell. Pretty much a first-year starting quarterback in the league who's leading the NFL in yards. So I think right now the question that a lot of Commanders fans are asking us in the media is, does Eric Bieniemy have an opportunity to become the head coach of this football team, whether it's interim coach this year or next year, fairly? So I kind of want to throw this at you, James, real quick, because you have a company. And I have to give you kudos because you're showing that there clearly is life after football, and you're a businessman doing some great things, near and dear to Rich and me as businessmen as well. So what are your thoughts on Eric Bieniemy right now? Does he have an opportunity to become the head coach of this football team?
Absolutely. We've created a firm that basically has some tools that allows us to go in and evaluate coaches in their background in terms of winning. Not just winning, but also looking at the positions that they coach, because we all know that the contributions on a coaching staff are huge during game day participation. So Eric has taken on those roles. He's been a running back coach. We all know about his background in there. He's won that at that level. And then obviously his success as an offensive coordinator. He's by far the most decorated and most successful offensive coordinator in the National Football League to date. And by far should be more than viable for a head coaching opportunity in the National Football League. And our tools have gleaned that out for Eric, and we believe that he truly should be given an opportunity to be a head coach in the National Football League.
Well, I see that you guys, your analytics grades, coaches, it grades coaching staffs, and it's, so many different variables that, play into how it's graded. And that's pretty awesome. And I hope it does give opportunities for not just minority coaches, but anyone. I mean, female coaches, the whole nine.
Absolutely.
And
yeah.
Unfortunately, this as a former player, that this league is littered with retreads. It's littered with a lot of guys that, maybe they did do some good things, but kind of maybe, things have passed them by a little bit. And, not to single out anyone in particular, but, I'm going to give a name or two out there. You look at a guy like Josh McDaniels. This is his second time being fired, but yet I'm sure he's going to find work somewhere. And that's not because, he's not an intelligent coach, but I think maybe if you've been fired twice as a head coach, maybe you're better off being a coordinator, if anything. How does your metrics and your analytics grade a guy like that? Is it something that will help people who may want to bring him in the building look at what he's done?
Well, what it does is it fairly analyzes Josh McDaniel and say, okay, look, where Josh has been, he's been more than successful. But then what you're able to do is you're able to separate out, okay, let's look at his success as a head coach, as a coordinator, as a quarterback coach, and really examine what the statistics breakdown looks like. Well, we're not just looking at wins and losses. We're looking at who did he develop as a player? What was the statistical output of that player, of that offensive unit, we're not just saying, hey, it's all about wins and losses, but let's be clear. This tool was designed after Vince Lombardi's career. He started at the high school level. He won 5 state championships. He then went on to West Point. He was coached there by Red Blake, who was at that time considered to be the Nick Saban of that era, right?
Okay.
From there, he went on to coach with Jim Lee Howell and New York Giants, right? And the other defensive coordinator at that time, and of course, Vince Lombardi was offensive coordinator, was Tom Landry. From there, he went on to coach the Green Bay Packers, and at each level, you saw him taking on greater responsibility, and most importantly, he won at every level. And I think those are the type of metrics that we need to apply towards the head coach, but not just the head coach. All the senior level position coaches needed to be graded accordingly. Like, we all need to sit back and really examine the situations that happen with the Josh McDaniels and start to see the owners in the front office take more of an active role with being involved with the evaluations of these senior level positions, so that you don't have a situation where you have to fire a coordinator mid-season and you don't have anyone to pop in there, like, to essentially take on that role, because no one's ever been a coordinator. By having those folks involved, we can now examine those backgrounds of those coaches, look to see who's been a coordinator, look to see who's been successful as a coordinator, and now you don't have a gaping hole like, say, a Buffalo Bills organization is now going to have to deal with.
Yeah.
This problem is eliminated, and essentially the game for that particular organization isn't over. The season isn't over, should I say, when it comes to the playoff.
Hugh, I'm sure you're not a fan of Dorsey being fired. Listen, we're talking about, Buffalo and their situation, as James just mentioned. I mean, Ken Dorsey was fired. Josh, Allen is not having, I guess you can say, a Josh Allen type year. He's turning the ball over. But I say this in fairness to, the coaches on this one. Ken Dorsey wasn't dropping passes the other night. He wasn't fumbling. He wasn't jumping off sides. And I do think that someone was being made out to be a scapegoat. What were your thoughts on that?
No, I agree 100%. It's something that James and I spoke about earlier in the week. I mean, I think Sean McDermott knows that his time is at a hand. I think when it's a sinking ship, then what happens, right? Head's got to roll, and it's got to be the coordinator. And to your point, Allen didn't make those mistakes. I mean, we talked a little bit about the Hackett's of the world, Kafka as well with the Giants. And I was curious, you don't like to talk about potential head coaches losing their jobs, but especially during the season, I have about 7 or 8 viable candidates, I should say, that whether it's Rivera in Washington, Mike Rabel, Belichick, we don't know about Antonio Pierce, McDermott, Staley maybe with the Chargers, Eberflus in Chicago, Robert Saleh in New York. I'm wondering if James can maybe elaborate a little more on this, where a tool like a CPAS, I guess, if you're getting ready to fire head coach and the season ends in, for all intents and purposes, late January or early January for some of these teams, or late December, when would you recommend using a tool like this?
Okay, I would suggest that you start on something like this as soon as possible. When you look at a coaching staff, what we've done is we've examined the last couple years of coaching staffs, and what we've done is we've graded each individual coach, and then we've put together a cumulative grade for each coaching staff. And what we found is each coaching staff that has the highest grade going in any given game, the highest graded coaching staff has a 60% chance of winning that game. If you know that coming in as an owner, that by you having the higher graded coaching staff each week, that you give yourself a chance to truly win the football game, I think we could eliminate many biases when it comes to whatever the owners may have, because ultimately, you want to give your coaching staff and your team every chance to win the game. And so now what happens is you're vitally involved, or you're very involved with, should I say, with the actual selections of these senior level coaches, because the value that it will bring come the regular season and the playoffs. And we all know ultimately it's about what you do when you get to the playoffs. How do you perform? And what do those coaches, how do they perform under those high pressure situations? Because as someone that's been involved in a couple 13-3 seasons and home field advantage throughout, there's nothing worse than having that taste in your mouth of knowing how close you came. But when those coaches didn't quite know what to do in those moments, it's a huge disappointment, not only for the team and the players, but for the fans. And so being involved in this process now, as you mentioned earlier, Rich, is critical to overcoming those obstacles when you get to the playoffs. Because again, Vince Lombardi, as we all know, had a 90% winning percentage in the playoffs. And that's the reason why we've designed this tool based off of his career.
This is I think the question I'm sure a lot of the fan base that watches this is Commander fans. And, I'm concerned for Eric in this regard. And I'm concerned because I think we're seeing now that he's proven that, he's proving that, it wasn't just Kansas City. It wasn't just Patrick Mahomes. It wasn't just Travis Kelce. We know those are Hall of Fame guys. We know about Andy Reid, great coach, Super Bowl winning coach. And, but when you heard these things coming out of, different camps in the offseason that Eric wasn't calling plays, and thought that was a total disrespect to his mind, because he still was in the room, whether he was calling plays or not. He still helped implement some of those game plans. Well, now we're seeing what he's capable of doing, because he's doing it with a first-year starting quarterback in Sam Howell. So my question to you guys would be, and maybe Q, you can jump in on this if we'll get James back. Do you feel like it's hurting him right now because of the simple fact of the matter is we know Ron Rivera is not going to be the coach there next year? I mean, they'd have to go on a Super Bowl winning run in order for Ron Rivera to retain his job. So does this hurt Eric Bieniemy out of the respect for Rivera to keep him there for the rest of the year?
So I actually I don't think they're going to make that in-season coaching change with Rivera. By all accounts, as you know, you're as close as anyone to the team. Very popular stand-up guy. They're not going to do it, even though under the guise of new ownership. But I think this only strengthens. I'm going the opposite way. Maybe the contrarian view. It strengthens Eric Bieniemy's case that he should be a head coaching candidate. He should have an opportunity to head coach because, as you alluded to, he's taken a first-year quarterback. He got under the shadow of Andy Reid. I mean, look what's going on with Buffalo. You get rid of the offensive coordinator, Brian Daboll, and Josh Allen's struggling. And now Daboll's dealing with the stuff that he's dealing with in New York. So there's something to be said about that. Mahomes is a different animal. I thought going into the season like that, it was a good spot knowing Rivera was on the hot seat. I don't think he took the job knowing that, Eric Bieniemy. You're going to take a job that's there for you. But the opportunity should be there with this, a young kid in Hal that not a lot of people were high on, except you, to be honest. Different type of defense now, no Sweat, no Young, higher expectations, get rid of the toxicity that Snyder left with that franchise. I think it strengthens his case. I don't think it does a disservice to him. And really, what's the point if you got rid of Rivera now, right? And you slid Bieniemy in there. And what if they struggle? Because again, coordinator, you're just dealing with coordinator things. Head coach, you got to deal with everything that's going on in the room, right? You got to read the room. Right. So then all of a sudden the pitchforks come out. He's overwhelmed. He can't handle it. And that's where I think let it play out and see what he does with this offense going forward.
But do you think that in a perfect world, most NFL franchises that are successful operate under the guise of they get a GM and the GM hires his coach?
Sure. Their own guys.
So if they were to go out and do that and get a GM, which we all think they're probably going to do, does that person already have their person in mind? And if so, it's fair. I mean, but now you're separating. See, I guess my whole point with this, Q, is I think Sam Howell suffers from that too. And I'm not saying that Sam Howell's not capable of being his own great quarterback, because I think he is. But I will say this, it's working right now with him and EB. And I don't think a lot of people want to see that broken up, and that very well could be the case.
So if you're Eric Bieniemy and Ron Rivera gets fired, and I know there's all these other reports about who might be a good viable option, right? And again, that's something maybe in the next 2 months or so. And I'll wait to see when we get James back up, because I'm curious to get his talk, his thoughts on this as well. But I think you pose a really interesting question, because it's almost as though it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. Right there, he is.
There he is. Welcome back.
I don't know what happened, guy. I just locked up on me, guys.
It's okay. It's all good. It's all good.
Yeah, James, we were just talking about how Lake just mentioned, maybe a disservice for Bieniemy. I went the contrarian route and said, I think Washington's a good spot for him because he can showcase what he can do. He got out of Andy Reid's shadow, so to speak. But then Lake brought up a really good point. You bring in a new GM, the GM wants his own guy. So if they were to get rid of Ron Rivera, do you believe, if this offense is consistent and how it grows and we see the progressions and they're buying it for Bieniemy, that he should be able to insert himself as a head coach and have that opportunity? Or, as Lake alluded to, hey man, if you're a head coach now, you're not really the coordinator and you got a lot of stuff to deal with, and maybe that young quarterback regresses.
You could take probably 5 teams out of the National Football League right now and say, okay, these teams are off limits when it comes to needing an offensive coordinator. Everybody else could use an Eric Bieniemy.
Okay.
Top down. I'm not going to call out any names, but look at some of the top teams in the National Football League right now. They've all bumped their head a little bit on the road, going down the road, and they've all had issues offensively. No one is dealing with the challenges that Eric Bieniemy is faced with. Okay, no one. He's got a 5th-round quarterback that hasn't started and contributed for a full season yet. He's got all sorts of problems with the offensive line. Okay, and he's got he's got a great group of receivers, awesome running backs, right? But the defense, we all know, has some issues. So he's got himself with a handful of problems. And no one is facing those challenges and dealing with them the way he is right now. And which is why Eric Bieniemy has an outstanding grade in our system. And it's why when we pick up the phone to talk to these organizations that we've talked to the last couple of years, we've sent information to these organizations saying, Eric Bieniemy, I don't care what he says in an interview room or what he may wear in an interview room, he is absolutely more than qualified from a winning perspective to be a head coach in the National Football League. And shame on the 16 other interviews that he's taken or had for those organizations that have not hired him. And whatever reasons they've used as a reason not to hire them, shame on them, because the guy's a heck of a coach.
Well, and I think
he's that each and every week.
Absolutely, James. I was just about to say, folks, right now I'm talking with Rich Quinones, former drive time host for ESPN radio up in Atlantic City. We go way back even to days in Florida at ESPN down there. And then, of course, Mr. James Hasty, former Pro Bowl cornerback in the league and doing some great things in the business sector now. And we're talking about, his company that perhaps the NFL will start using as its tool, to help some of these young aspiring coaches. And this is the thing, in this town, some people think I'm tough on Ron and they're like, you're really trying to get him out of there. And I'm like, I'm not trying to fire anyone. I'm not about taking someone's livelihood from them. God knows we've worked hard to make our own, right? So why would you want to take it from another man? I'm just saying this. I think that the league right now has gone young. It really has. If you look at some of the bright coaches out there, they're seeing the game in a different way. And some of the older guards, as you would say, it seems like, they're kind of stuck in their ways on how they're going about their X's and O's. And I think if you look at Washington over the past 4 years since Ron Rivera's gotten there, they've done some things well. He's developed some late round draft picks that a lot of coaches just can't do. So I give him credit for that. But I think overall, when you see the job that's being done in Houston right now with D'Amico, and you see what he's doing with a rookie quarterback, by the way, and CJ Stroud, you can't use the rhetoric that we're in a rebuild. You just can't do that anymore. This league is about winning now, winning today. Unfortunately, we do know that sometimes minority coaches who inherit some of the worst jobs in the league as their first head coaching job, don't have the same leash. We know that. How does your company, how does this new analytics, how does this, kind of, push that kind of narrative to the side and give these guys fair opportunities?
Well, I would say this: any team that's having their fair share of struggles,
Mm-hmm.
look at the players and look at who their coaches are.
Okay.
If you go back and don't take my word for it, there's Wikipedia, there's Google that you can go and search and look at these guys' track record. No,
Mm-hmm.
seriously, you can go and look. It's real easy, and you can go look at the records of the teams that they've coached and look at what happened with those players, and you will come to a conclusion very quickly. You don't even need analytics to really determine what's going on.
Yeah.
And I would say, if you think there's some issues going on, let's say, for example, with the Commanders' defense, start there. Look at the position coaches that are coaching the secondary, that are coaching the linebackers, that are coaching the D line. Look at their body of work. Look at the players, and you'll come to your own conclusions. And then don't just stop with the Commanders. Go throughout the league, and you'll find that those are some of the issues. They're not isolated. Those issues are directly connected with the players and the coach's success, because when you get in these big moment situations, I talk about big moments all the time, because we can all talk about training camp and all the great things that we see in training camp. But what happens in November and December is key. In those big moment situations, do you know when to call the timeout? Do you know when to challenge the play? Do you know what to do on 3rd and short and 4th and short? What do you typically do? There's a history for you. And some guys know what to do in those big moments because they have experience of doing it, and some don't, right? And then when we're talking about like getting away from analytics, because I know a lot of folks, oh, it's more than just analytics. We have an interview tool that you can turn on in a room. It will record and transcribe our conversation, Lake, and it will grade. If you're the employer, it will grade whether or not what I'm saying is on par with what you're looking for. Because you'll say, hey, this is what I believe is important: culture, leadership. You'll come up with a list of things that you believe are important. If I come into the interview room, or I could even be a separate room altogether, if I come into that room and I'm making the same type of comments, if I'm using the same type of language, we're using what's called content analysis, right?
Yeah.
And we're recognizing that, you know what, this guy is saying this, James is saying the same thing as Lake. Those two may be on the same page, right? So despite what we may look like in terms of our skin color, if we philosophically are on the same page, guess what happens in those critical moments? We're probably going to see things similar in terms of how to handle those situations, right? So now we've got a quantitative tool to really measure the output of your performance each week through your players, through statistics, through the postseason. What did you do? Did you coach at different levels? What other levels of the game were you involved in? And what was the outcome? Did you win the game? Because as Vince Lombardi said, winning isn't everything. It's the only thing.
The only thing.
It's the only thing. And sports, there's no way around it. You can say all the things that you want about going 13-3, James Hasty. Did you win a championship? No. Okay, well then go sit down. Okay, that's the end of the story. I mean, that's as real as it gets. Unfortunately, we can talk about all the great things that we did as a team, but did you win the Super Bowl? And the answer is no.
So one of the things that I'm curious about with how how all of this is put together, scientifically, analytically.
Yes.
Does it also benefit, let's just say now, I'm using Washington as this because I personally feel like the Eric Bieniemy situation and what's going on in Washington is like, I mean, if you had a study about this, like a case study.
We do have several case studies, by the way. Dr. Stephen Kierton and Dr. Philip Sidek, a mathematician, and Dr. Kierton, they're both at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, so please look them up.
Okay.
Dr. Kierton is the head of the sociology department. He's the first African-American to head the department in 140-year history. He's a close friend of mine, and I'm proud to say that he's done several studies for us on the information that we're sharing with you now. So we can be more than happy to provide you copies of the research that was done. the research that was done allowed us to create the qualitative tool, the interview tool, as I mentioned. And Dr. Sidek was very instrumental in helping me develop the algorithmic formula that we created as well. So we've got math and we've got science here. Okay. And it
this
has
is
nothing to do with race.
well, but this also can help refute all of those preconceived notions and things before you walk in a room. And, you know, the Commanders just hired someone 3 weeks ago, a new analytics person. So if you're going to go that route and keep saying we're going to push analytics here, well, you have that over here. So it goes hand in hand.
Now, let me back up and push back a little bit on the analytics side, because game day analytics is different than what we're doing, right? Game day analytics is, what do you do on 4th down? Do you go for it or not, right? The analytics says you go for it on 4th and 2 in this situation in the 4th quarter with such and such amount of time left in the game. But what's your experience as a coach? Okay, the analytics tells you that, but now as a coach, what have you done over the last 20 years from knowing the game? When you're at the high school level, when you're at the college level, what was your experience? See, not even the analytics department can tell you that part, right? They can't tell you based on your experiences whether or not you should go for it or not. The analytics says go for it, but should you have gone for 2, Ron Rivera, against the Philadelphia Eagles when you had a chance to win the game?
Yeah, you should have.
Had you gone for it, you might have won the game.
Yeah.
Right? And then you come back and you have another situation where, was it Seattle, I believe? Should you go for it and go for your 2, or should you go in overtime? See, I'm all about experience and big moments. What did you do in those big moments when you were with Carolina? Right?
See, this is
That's
good.
what I'm talking about.
No, this is good. And I'm going to say this too. I think it'll also help some journalists too. Q, I'm sure you can agree with that.
Wow.
I
I mean, we won't go down that rabbit hole, right? I mean, I hear Joe Burrow's wrist is just fine, but you know, James, you said something when you joined me earlier in the week. We talked about, you know, the coaching, and the perfect example you gave was late in the game, Denver, Buffalo. Why do you have that kid back there? Russell Wilson, presence of mind. Let me just chuck it up. Don't blame the kid, blame coaching. I have a question for you. With all this data that you've acquired, and I know you said for years and years it goes back with the
Vince
CPAS.
Lombardi, Paul Brown, Tom Landry,
everything.
all the names are in there. Eddie Robinson, they're all in there.
Can you see? And again, this, man, it goes with the extraneous variables we talked about, like a situation, Brian Daboll in New York last year. And by the way, you see, I pushed the helmet back a little further.
I know, man. It seems like it's getting bigger every time I go on.
You got that Giants thing out of the way. Get that out of the way.
Okay, Lex.
I still listen. 1988. I still can't let go. But anyway, Jets and Giants. With Brian Daboll last year, right? I'm going for it on the road, Tennessee. Let's set the tone for the season. I'm an aggressive guy, you know, interviewing process. The data says here's a guy that's, you know, we think he's saying all the right things. He's a good fit. We know his instincts are right. Boom, boom, boom. And then conversely, you flip the script to this year and everything that went right when it came to being aggressive. Now it's a 180. Can you see that in the data? Is that tough to gauge? Because I guess, explain to me how a guy who can be so aggressive one year, all of a sudden goes into the shell the second year. Are we talking about injuries, play calling, inconsistent play, whether, like, how do you figure that out? And can that data, can we get a sense of that, you know, to kind of forecast how this guy's really going to be throughout the course of his career as a coach?
Well, let me just say this. Brian Daboll is a winner, and he is a highly graded coach in our system. He is a national champion, and he has done some phenomenal things in the National Football League. So bar none, Brian Daboll is an outstanding coach, okay? Now, what Brian Daboll has done is he's hired some coaches that probably you want to question. You want to question on Mike Kafka and say, okay, Mike Kafka, a little young, a little inexperienced. You know, was he quite ready? We've seen and had discussions about Brian calling plays again, right? Well, he should, because in all fairness, Mike Kafka doesn't have the experience in the big moments to know what to do, right? And what also happens is you get a year of time under your belt in the National Football League, people start to figure you out.
Sure.
Right. And so if you're a young guy and you happen to have some tendencies on things that you keep doing the same things over and over again, people pick up on that. Right. Injuries and things we all know are part of the game. So please don't tell me about injuries. Don't tell me about penalties. These are all part of the game. Deal with it. This is part of the. You're never going to come into a season and I get out of a season with no injuries. You're never going to come out of a game with no penalties. So stop making excuses. This is part of the game. We all know that, high school, college, and pros. But what we also know is that staff is top heavy. We know Brian Dable's outstanding. We know Wink Martindale is outstanding. But then you got a serious drop off, right? You got some coaches that are really inexperienced from in those senior level positions that we talked about. And so now when it comes in those big moments, those guys happen to be the ones that are kind of getting exposed because Brian Dable can only be in so many places, right? Wink Martindale can only be in so many places. Wink Martindale can't go close to linebackers and the DBs. He's got to coordinate the defense. The same thing with the offense. And, I think the Giants would be better served to go ahead and have Brian Dable take back the play calling responsibilities. He's a heck of a play caller. Everybody knows that. And give Mike Kafka some more time. But unfortunately, the National Football League, we don't give you time. You have to win now. We're not in the wait for your freshman year and your sophomore year, and then you get to play as a junior. You got to play right now, and it's all about performance. And so I think what we're seeing is the coaching staff is top heavy, right? And you're seeing some of that play out each and every week with the rest of the coaching staff, which is why, again, the general manager and the owners need to be involved with the selection of those coaches.
Folks, right now we have got about 4 minutes left in this segment. I'm joined by a good friend of mine, Rich Quinones, and Mr. James Hasty, former Pro Bowl cornerback in the league. I did want to, get this, and hopefully we can get this in the next 4 minutes or so. Are you able to give grades for Washington as far as their coaching staff? Are you able to give an individual grade, or, how your company sees Eric Bieniemy, as far as a number?
Eric Bieniemy is right up there with the Brian Dable. Okay. He's a coach that is right on the threshold of given opportunity, could very well be a Hall of Fame coach. Okay. And he just needs an opportunity, right? That's what we're talking about here. Brian Dable's the same type of coach as Eric Bieniemy. Both are well-decorated coaches. There's really no difference in their resumes in terms of winning. Eric Bieniemy, I would argue, he has had much more of a success at the NFL level, obviously with Super Bowls. But Brian Dable is obviously a very good coach as well.
Okay. Now, as far as, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot here, James, but this is just, for viewers, they want to know these things. What would you give Washington's overall coaching grade?
Right now, when we grade the coaching staffs, the Kansas City Chiefs are the highest graded coaching staff this year, and they were last year.
Okay.
I would say the high end on the coaching spectrum for the group would be a 30. Okay. And we've got a coaching staff that's a 0, believe it or not.
Wow.
And so there you have it. The Washington Commanders are right around a 13.
Ooh, man, this is good.
So,
is that minus Eric or with Eric?
No, that's with Eric.
Oh my God! So you already know.
How do you get a 0? You get 500
you already
name down on the SAT.
Well, if you got a coaching staff that has an F-graded coordinator, or F-graded D coordinator, or F-graded quarterback coach, or F-graded O-line coach. I mean, again, you guys, it's not personal. It's really not.
Oh no, the numbers don't lie.
Numbers
don't lie. Speak for themselves. We all went to school. We all went to classes and got graded. We all knew what their GPAs and all that stuff meant.
Don't remind me.
And this is and we're using GPA like grades.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll say it again. We're using, for your own information, Lake, we're using GPA like grades.
I'm just saying a 13 with Eric, and you already said he has one of the higher grades. Folks, that's all you need to know. I don't need to make an argument anymore. It's right there in the numbers. Listen, guys, I could do this all day with you, but as you know, we have bills and things like that. But just really quick, we have like a minute or so left. I want you gentlemen to let everybody know where they can find you, where they can check out all the great work. James, we'll go ahead and start with you. Where can everybody find what you're doing with this passion project? It's really good stuff here.
Our website is enejconsult.com. That's ENEJE consult.com. I'm on LinkedIn under Enej Consulting. Feel free to pop on or go on to LinkedIn and shoot me a message.
And Q, where
We gotta
on
get
Q.
James
I
on
remember
Twitter.
on Q with Q.
We got to get James on X, man, so he can break down these games. Yeah, Rich Q on. We'll work on that. Rich Q on Q, and of course, got the pods going, and on Q on the YouTube channel. Then, hopefully, down the road, you and I are going to be putting some stuff together for Sports Journey. So I look forward to that. You keep running that great network, keep doing great stuff. And James, I'm a big fan, man. I love your transparency. It's fantastic, and like I said, you're gonna ruffle some feathers, but in a good way. This is overdue and needed. It's needed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having me on, Lake. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, look, I'm going to get you guys back on soon, and we'll do it for a longer period because this is great stuff. But as always, folks, I appreciate you joining us here today on the After Practice Podcast. So much more. I told you we go really in depth with this stuff, and I had two great guests.